The sun, a fiery orange ball, was just starting its slow descent, painting the dusty country road in long, golden streaks. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a familiar smell now, but one that still felt like a new beginning for our family. All of that peacefulness, however, was about to be shattered in a way none of us would ever forget. I stood frozen on our porch, my heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic bird, watching a scene unfold that looked like it had been ripped straight from a wild movie. Grandpa Richard, his face set like stone, was behind the wheel of his ancient, rusty Ford F-250, the very same truck he'd used for decades to haul everything from hay bales to fallen trees. But today, it was hauling something entirely different, something that made my jaw drop so low I thought it might hit the porch floorboards. Chained to the back of Grandpa's truck, groaning and scraping along the gravel, was Brenda Jenkins's spotless, gleaming white SUV. The vehicle, usually parked with meticulous precision in her own driveway 2 streets over, was now being dragged, unwillingly, towards the murky, winding creek that marked the very edge of our sprawling property. I could see the expensive chrome glinting in the fading light, the custom rims spinning uselessly as the SUV bounced and shuddered, leaving a trail of scratches and disturbed stones in its wake. Brenda herself was practically purple, her usual perfectly coiffed hair now a disheveled mess, her designer blouse askew. She was running alongside her vehicle, flailing her arms like a scarecrow caught in a hurricane, her shrieks echoing through the quiet twilight. "You lunatic! You deranged old man! What do you think you're doing?" she screamed, her voice cracking with fury and disbelief. Grandpa, though, didn't even glance her way. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, a focused, almost serene look on his weathered face. He looked like he was simply going about his daily chores, perhaps towing a broken farm implement, not actively disposing of a neighbor's very expensive car into a body of water. The old truck rumbled steadily, each turn of its massive tires pulling Brenda's prized possession closer and closer to the creek bank. A moment later, with a final, sickening lurch and a loud splash, the front wheels of the SUV dipped into the dark water, followed quickly by the rest of the vehicle. It settled with a mournful gurgle, the top half of the car now looking like some strange, beached whale in the shallow current. Brenda's screams turned into a strangled gasp, and she stumbled, splashing into the muddy bank herself. She stared, wide-eyed, at her submerged car, then slowly, painstakingly, turned her gaze towards Grandpa. The look she gave him was a mixture of pure hatred and utter bewilderment. He simply unhitched the chain, gave her a curt nod, and then, without another word, drove his truck slowly back towards our house. I looked at Mom and Dad, who had rushed out onto the porch behind me, their faces a mixture of shock and something that looked suspiciously like a tiny, secret smile. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant, growing wail of sirens. What had just happened? And what in the world would happen next? It all began about a year ago when we moved from the bustling suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, to this little slice of heaven in the countryside of Virginia. Our family, my dad David, my mom Sarah, my younger sister Olivia, and me, Kevin, had always dreamed of having more space, of hearing crickets instead of traffic, and seeing stars instead of streetlights. Dad, a software engineer, and Mom, an elementary school teacher, had spent years saving up for this very moment, picturing a life where Olivia and I could run free, climb trees, and get our hands dirty without worrying about bumping into a neighbor's meticulously manicured lawn or getting a stern lecture about noise levels. When we found the old farmhouse with 20 acres of land, complete with its own winding creek and a small, neglected orchard, it felt like discovering a hidden treasure. The house itself was a charming, albeit dusty, relic, with creaky floorboards and a wide, inviting porch that practically begged for lazy summer afternoons. Grandpa Richard, Dad's father, had lived alone in the nearby town for years since Grandma passed away. He was a quiet man, a retired mechanic with hands that looked like they'd wrestled grizzly bears, but a heart as gentle as a lamb. When we told him about the move, he'd simply nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips, and said he'd be happy to help us get settled. He moved into the small guest cottage on our property, a cozy little place nestled among the towering oak trees, and his presence immediately brought a sense of groundedness and wisdom to our new, slightly chaotic, rural life. He knew everything about fixing things, from leaky faucets to stubborn tractors, and his calm demeanor was a balm when things felt overwhelming. Our first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking boxes, sweeping away cobwebs, and exploring every nook and cranny of our new domain. Olivia and I spent hours building makeshift forts by the creek, pretending to be explorers charting uncharted territories. Dad, with Grandpa's help, tackled the overgrown garden, unearthing forgotten rose bushes and clearing paths. Mom, with her knack for making any space feel warm and inviting, transformed the dusty farmhouse into a cozy home filled with laughter and the aroma of freshly baked cookies. It was everything we had imagined, a true escape from the concrete jungle. We quickly learned that our little slice of paradise was part of a larger community governed by a homeowners association, or HOA. Dad had been a bit wary at first, remembering stories from friends about strict rules and endless fees. HOAs can be real nightmares, he'd grumbled, flipping through the thick binder of covenants and bylaws the real estate agent had handed us. They dictate everything, from the color of your mailbox to the type of flowers you plant. Mom, ever the optimist, had gently squeezed his arm. "Oh, honey, it's a rural HOA. It'll probably just be about keeping the roads clear and making sure nobody builds a neon pink shed. Besides, think of the community events. Potlucks and block parties." She envisioned quaint gatherings and friendly waves across fences. And for a while, her optimism seemed well-founded. Our immediate neighbors, the Millers and the Rodriguezes, were wonderfully welcoming, bringing over homemade casseroles and offering advice on local services. It felt like we had found our tribe, a place where people looked out for each other. Then, about a month after we moved in, we met Brenda Jenkins. She lived 2 streets over, in a house that looked like it had been plucked directly from a magazine cover, all pristine white siding and perfectly symmetrical shrubs. We first encountered her during what Mom affectionately called our "welcome to the neighborhood" barbecue. Brenda arrived fashionably late, clutching a bottle of expensive-looking wine that she announced was not for general consumption, but a little something for the hosts. She surveyed our slightly mismatched outdoor furniture with a look that was a mixture of polite disapproval and intense scrutiny. "Well, it's certainly rustic," she'd said, her lips barely moving as she offered a tight smile. "I'm Brenda Jenkins, head of the Architectural Review Committee. And, of course, unofficial oversight for general adherence to community standards." Her eyes had glided over the small, perfectly normal pile of wood chips Dad had left near the garden bed, ready to be spread. "I do hope you're aware of the guidelines regarding outdoor debris. For aesthetic consistency, you understand." Dad, bless his heart, had just smiled kindly. "Oh, those are just from clearing out the old rose bushes. We'll spread them by tomorrow." Brenda had nodded slowly, as if making a mental note. "Very good. Just ensuring we all maintain the desirable visual harmony of our community." She then proceeded to spend the rest of the barbecue subtly observing everyone, taking mental notes, and occasionally correcting a minor conversational faux pas. She asked Olivia if her skipping rope was Regulation Red, and politely suggested to Mom that a slightly too loud laugh might disturb the wildlife. It was annoying, for sure, but we chalked it up to her being a bit eccentric, a stickler for rules. We mostly just chuckled about it later, thinking that was the extent of her oversight. We were so wrong. Her presence quickly became a frequent, unwelcome fixture. Brenda seemed to possess an uncanny ability to appear out of nowhere whenever we were doing anything that involved our outdoor space. If Dad was mowing the lawn, she might drive by slowly, observing his technique. If Olivia and I were playing frisbee in the yard, her immaculate white SUV would crawl past, her eyes narrowed in apparent concentration. It was like living under a low-flying surveillance drone. We started calling her HOA Karen, in hushed tones, a silly nickname that perfectly captured her self-important, meddling nature. One sweltering Tuesday afternoon, a less extreme but still deeply irritating incident occurred. Dad was meticulously tending to our small patch of corn, his brow furrowed in concentration as he checked for pests. He wore his favorite old baseball cap, stained with sweat and a bit of mud, a truly relaxed picture. Suddenly, Brenda's white SUV glided to a silent stop on the gravel road just beyond our property line. She didn't get out, she just sat there, engine idling, a perfect, serene smile plastered on her face. Dad looked up, squinting against the sun. He gave a friendly wave. Brenda responded with a slight, almost imperceptible nod, her gaze fixed on something just beyond him. "Good afternoon, David," she called out, her voice perfectly modulated, like a news anchor delivering a minor weather update. "Lovely day for horticulture." "It is," Dad replied, trying to keep his tone light. "Just enjoying some peace and quiet out here." "Indeed," Brenda purred. "I just wanted to make a quick observation, if you don't mind." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "I've noticed your corn stalks are rather tall. And they appear to be quite close to the fence line." Dad blinked. "Yes, well, that's how corn grows, Brenda. And that's our property line." He gestured vaguely towards the old, weathered wooden fence that had been there for decades, a clear demarcation. Brenda tsked softly. "Ah, but the covenant, Article 7, subsection C, clearly states, no planting shall exceed a height of 6 feet within 20 feet of a property boundary that abuts a common thoroughfare, unless approved by the Architectural Review Committee for Aesthetic Integration. Your corn, David, appears to be well over 6 feet. And it's undeniably abutting the thoroughfare." Dad stared at her, then at his corn, then back at her. He actually started to laugh, a low, incredulous chuckle. "Brenda, it's corn. It's supposed to be tall. And this fence has been here for 50 years. Are you seriously telling me the HOA has a rule about the height of my corn?" Brenda's smile tightened, just a fraction. "Rules are rules, David. They are put in place for the collective good, to maintain order and property values. I'm simply advising you. We wouldn't want to receive a formal notice, now, would we?" With that, she put her SUV into gear and drove off, leaving Dad standing there, holding a garden trowel, looking utterly bewildered. Mom, who had come out with a pitcher of iced tea, found him still shaking his head. "She's just incredible," Dad muttered, taking a long gulp. "Corn height. I can't believe it." This was the first time Brenda's oversight had directly impacted our gardening, and it left a sour taste. It wasn't a huge deal, but it felt like a tiny invasion, a constant reminder that our space wasn't entirely our own. Grandpa just watched the whole exchange from his porch, a slight twinkle in his eye that we couldn't quite decipher. He didn't say anything then, but I remember him polishing his old fishing knife later that evening, his movements slow and deliberate. The incidents became more frequent and less subtle. Brenda began driving past our house several times a day, sometimes stopping to simply observe for minutes at a time. She had a small notepad and a pen, and we often saw her scribbling furiously. It felt less like a neighbor keeping an eye out and more like a private investigator building a case. Olivia started feeling uncomfortable playing in the front yard, retreating to the privacy of the backyard whenever she saw Brenda's white SUV. Our peaceful haven was starting to feel like a surveillance zone. The extreme event that truly pushed us to the edge happened on a crisp Saturday morning. Dad had finally decided to tackle a project he'd been dreaming about since we bought the house. Setting up a small, rustic, old-fashioned basketball hoop on a cleared patch of concrete near the garage. It was a simple, weathered wooden backboard with a rusted metal hoop, salvaged from an old farmstead. He envisioned weekend games with me and Olivia, maybe even a few friendly matches with Grandpa. He was out there early, humming a tune, drilling holes into the concrete to anchor the post securely. I was helping him, holding tools and fetching water. The air was cool, the sun was bright, and it felt like a perfect family morning. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and clear, cut through the quiet. "David! What in the name of all that is reasonable are you doing?" We both looked up to see Brenda Jenkins striding purposefully across our lawn. She wasn't on the road, she was on our property, marching straight towards us, her face a mask of indignation. She wore a tailored pantsuit, as if she were heading to a corporate board meeting, not accosting neighbors in their yard. "Is that a basketball hoop? An unapproved recreational structure? And salvaged wood, no less," she exclaimed, pointing an accusatory finger at the perfectly charming, old hoop. "Do you have any idea how that impacts property values? It looks like something from a junkyard." Dad slowly straightened up, his hand still on the drill. His face, usually so patient and easygoing, hardened. "Brenda," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you are on my private property. And this is my basketball hoop. It's for my family. It's not a recreational structure that requires HOA approval on our own land." Brenda scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. "Every structure, every modification, everything visible from the common areas, is subject to review. Article 9, subsection B, Maintenance of Aesthetic Uniformity. This rustic monstrosity violates the spirit of our community. I will not have my property value diminished by your choices." Her voice was rising, shrill now, cutting through the calm morning air. "I'm going to file a formal complaint. You'll be fined. You'll have to remove this eyesore immediately." She took another step closer, almost right up to Dad's face, her eyes blazing with a self-righteous fury that startled me. It wasn't just annoying anymore. It felt genuinely threatening, a complete disregard for boundaries and personal space. Dad's jaw clenched, and for a terrifying second, I thought he might actually lose his temper. But just as he opened his mouth, a quiet, steady voice cut through the tension. "Brenda." Grandpa Richard was standing by the corner of the garage, having seemingly appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't even raising his voice. But the single word, spoken so calmly, carried more weight than all of Brenda's shrieks combined. He simply stood there, his arms crossed, his gaze steady and unwavering. It was the kind of look that could make even the most boisterous person think twice. Brenda, for the first time, seemed to deflate slightly, her tirade sputtering to a halt. She straightened her suit jacket, suddenly looking less like an angry general and more like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "Mr. Richard," she said, her voice surprisingly subdued. "I was just explaining the rules to David here. These rules," Grandpa said, taking a slow step forward, "do not extend onto private land, Brenda. Not when it comes to a simple basketball hoop for a boy and his father. And they certainly don't give you permission to march onto someone's yard and yell at them." His voice was still calm, but there was an steel edge to it now. "This is private property. Your authority stops at the property line. You understand?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed a few times. She looked from Grandpa's unyielding face to Dad's stern expression, then back to the despised basketball hoop. She seemed to realize, for the first time, that she had truly overstepped. Her face flushed, she muttered something about proper procedures and community standards, then, without another word, she turned and scurried back across our lawn, back to the road, and quickly got into her SUV, driving away in a huff. Dad let out a long, slow breath. "Thanks, Dad," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was about to say something I'd regret." Grandpa simply nodded, his gaze following Brenda's retreating vehicle. "Some folks," he said, his voice a low rumble, "just need a clear reminder of where the line is drawn. And sometimes, they need to be shown what happens when they cross it." He gave a meaningful glance towards the creek that snaked through the back of our property. It was a cryptic remark at the time, a warning we didn't fully understand. But Brenda's brazen invasion, her willingness to march onto our private land and dictate what we could and couldn't do, had cemented one thing: this was no longer a minor annoyance. This was a battle for our peace, for our home. And it was clear that Brenda Jenkins had just declared war. Brenda's hasty retreat that Saturday morning left a strange quiet in its wake, but the unsettling feeling she brought lingered like a bad smell. Her bold move, marching right onto our land and trying to stop Dad from putting up a simple basketball hoop, wasn't just rude, it felt like a trespass, a violation of the very peace we had moved here to find. After she sped off, the air still crackled with the leftover tension. Dad stood there, drill in hand, a look of grim determination replacing his usual good humor. I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Mom came out of the house, drawn by the raised voices, and her face mirrored Dad's frustration. She tried to offer a comforting touch to his arm, but he was too wound up. Grandpa Richard, ever the quiet observer, simply walked over to the half-installed basketball hoop. He ran a weathered hand over the old wood, then nodded slowly. "Good solid piece," he mused, as if discussing nothing more than carpentry. "Just needs to be anchored properly." His calm words were like a small current of steady water in a choppy sea, a reminder that some things were bigger than Brenda's meddling. We finished installing the hoop that day, and every hammer blow, every turn of a wrench, felt like an act of defiance, a small victory against Brenda's unwanted intrusion. The following week started with an eerie silence from Brenda. Her white SUV didn't cruise by every hour, she didn't appear in her garden, ostentatiously pruning imaginary dead leaves while staring at our house. It was a silence that felt heavier than her usual noise, like the quiet before a storm. Mom tried to convince us it was a good sign, that maybe Grandpa's firm words had finally gotten through to her. Perhaps she realized she went too far, Mom suggested over dinner, trying to sound hopeful. Dad just grunted, not quite believing it. Grandpa just slowly chewed his food, his gaze distant, as if already seeing something we couldn't. I felt a knot of worry tighten in my stomach. I had seen enough movies to know that the villain never just gives up. They always came back, usually with a bigger, nastier plan. Olivia, usually oblivious to adult tensions, started asking why the white car lady wasn't driving by anymore. We just told her Brenda was probably busy. This period of false calm, a low point in the rising tide of conflict, lasted for 3 agonizing days. It was a strange kind of relief, mixed with a nagging suspicion that something worse was brewing. We found ourselves constantly glancing out windows, straining to hear the faint hum of an engine, waiting for the other shoe to drop. We even started to miss her predictable drive-bys, at least those were transparent. This silence felt sinister. The small, annoying incidents continued, though now they were less direct confrontations and more like subtle acts of passive aggression. We'd find little notices tucked into our mailbox, official-looking but clearly self-made, pointing out minor infractions: tall grass observed near culvert, Section 4, Paragraph D. Unapproved color swatch on front door trim, Article 11, Subsection G. Our front door was a perfectly normal forest green. They were unsigned, but the immaculate handwriting and the tone of self-importance screamed Brenda. Dad would just crumple them up with a sigh and toss them in the recycling. Mom tried to laugh them off, but her shoulders were starting to slump a little more each day. It was like living with 1,000 tiny paper cuts, individually harmless, but collectively draining. Then came the incident with the "no trespassing" signs. Grandpa, always thinking ahead, had decided it was a good idea to put up clear signs around the perimeter of our property, especially near the creek and the backwoods where we knew people sometimes wandered. He'd gone to the hardware store and bought sturdy, bright red signs with bold white letters. He, Dad, and I spent a Saturday afternoon meticulously nailing them to trees and fence posts. "Just a friendly reminder," Grandpa had said, wiping sweat from his brow. Most folks are good, but a clear sign helps. The very next morning, we woke up to find every single one of those signs spray painted over with ugly, black circles. Not just painted, but deliberately defaced, making the "no trespassing" unreadable. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble, walking the entire perimeter of our 20 acres in the dark, to do something so petty and mean. It was a clear message, a chilling escalation. It was no longer about rules, it was personal. Dad's face was grim when he discovered it. "This isn't right," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "This is vandalism." He suspected Brenda, of course, but there was no proof. No fingerprints, no witnesses. Just the undeniable message left in black spray paint. Grandpa, seeing the defaced signs, just slowly shook his head. He didn't look angry, not really. He looked disappointed. And then, he looked determined. That look, I realize now, was far more unsettling than any shout or fist-pounding from Dad. The next extreme event unfolded a few weeks later, pushing us past the point of mere annoyance into genuine concern and a desperate need to protect our space. It started subtly, as these things often do with Brenda. Our postal worker, Mr. Henderson, a kind older gentleman with a perpetually cheerful whistle, stopped by our house one afternoon, looking unusually flustered. He rarely strayed from his route, just dropping mail in the box and moving on. "Mrs. Sarah," he began, fidgeting with his cap, "I just wanted to let you know. I've been getting some complaints about your mailbox." Mom, who was watering her front porch plants, straightened up, puzzled. Our mailbox was a standard black one, perfectly functional, nothing fancy. "Complaints? From whom?" Mr. Henderson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, Ms. Jenkins. She says it's non-compliant with the community's aesthetic standards. Something about the post being too narrow, and the flag being the wrong shade of red. She even suggested I should withhold delivery until it's rectified." He looked horrified even repeating it. Of course, I told her that's not how it works, but she was quite insistent. Mom's eyes widened. "She told you to withhold our mail because of the mailbox post?" Her voice was disbelieving. "Yes, ma'am. Said it was disrupting the visual harmony of the street. I told her I just deliver the mail, not enforce HOA rules." Mr. Henderson gave a nervous shrug, obviously wanting to escape the weirdness. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. She's really something else." He quickly made his excuses and hurried off down the road, probably eager to forget the entire bizarre interaction. Mom stood there, watering can in hand, staring at our perfectly innocent mailbox as if it had suddenly transformed into a monster. This was a new low. Intercepting mail was not just petty, it felt like a direct attack on our right to exist as functioning members of society. It was an invasion of a fundamental liberty. But that was just the appetizer for the main course. The real explosion happened the very next day, a Tuesday. Dad had finally managed to take a day off work, a rare treat, and he was determined to spend it clearing out some of the thicker brush near the back of our property, hoping to create a new walking path down to the creek. He had borrowed Grandpa's small tractor, the kind with a brush hog attachment, and he was chugging along, making good progress. Olivia and I were helping, picking up smaller branches and tossing them into a growing pile. The sun was warm, the air was fresh, and it felt like good, honest work. Suddenly, the roar of an engine grew louder than Grandpa's tractor. It wasn't Brenda's SUV this time, it was a beat-up, rusty old pickup truck we'd never seen before, pulling a small, equally rusty trailer. The truck swerved onto our unpaved access road, the one that branched off the main road and led directly to our property, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. The driver, a gruff-looking man with a scraggly beard, pulled up right next to where Dad was working. In the passenger seat, sitting ramrod straight, was Brenda Jenkins. She leaned out the window, a triumphant, almost gleeful smirk on her face. "David. Stop that machine immediately. You are in clear violation of community regulations. Dad, startled, turned off the tractor. Brenda, what are you doing here? And who is this? This, Brenda announced, puffing out her chest, is Mr. Peterson, a certified land surveyor. And he is here because I have engaged his services, on behalf of the Homeowners Association, to verify the exact boundary lines of your property. We have reason to believe you are encroaching on common areas with your aggressive landscaping. She gestured grandly at Dad's cleared path. And until the survey is complete, I am instructing you to cease all activity. Dad's eyes narrowed. You hired a surveyor? To survey my land? Without even talking to me? His voice was rising now. And you think you can just march onto my property with him and tell me what I can and can't do? This is not just your land, David. Brenda retorted, her voice regaining its shrill edge. This is part of the community. And as head of the Architectural Review Committee, it is my duty to ensure compliance. Mr. Peterson, if you please, commence with your measurements. The surveyor, looking deeply uncomfortable, slowly got out of his truck, holding a tripod and some measuring equipment. He clearly didn't want to be caught in the middle of this. You are not doing anything on my property. Dad roared, stepping off the tractor. You have no right. Get off my land, both of you. Now. Brenda, however, was undeterred. I have every right. This is an official HOA action. And if you impede this survey, you will face severe penalties. She turned to Mr. Peterson. Proceed. The surveyor hesitated, glancing nervously between Dad's furious face and Brenda's unyielding one. He slowly began to set up his equipment, taking a few steps onto the freshly cleared path. It was too much. The mailbox, the defaced signs, and now this blatant invasion. Dad clenched his fists, his face red with a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. I had never seen him this angry. Get out, he shouted, taking a threatening step towards the surveyor. Get off my property right now, or I swear to God, I will call the sheriff. Brenda just crossed her arms, a smug look on her face. Go ahead, David. Call them. They'll confirm that the HOA has every right to ensure proper land usage. You're just delaying the inevitable. The air crackled with hostility. The surveyor froze, his tripod half unfolded. It was a standoff, a complete invasion, and a blatant challenge to our ownership and peace. This was no longer just an annoying neighbor. This was an outright assault on our home, and it felt like it could boil over into something truly terrible at any moment. The tension in our backyard that Tuesday morning was so thick you could almost taste it, like the metallic tang before a thunderstorm. Dad, usually a calm and collected man, was absolutely fuming, his face a deep shade of red. Brenda, standing beside the nervous surveyor, wore a smug expression that just begged for a slap. Her audacity, bringing a stranger onto our private property to challenge our boundaries, was simply unbelievable. I stood frozen, watching the standoff, my heart pounding in my chest. The surveyor, Mr. Peterson, looked like a deer caught in headlights, clearly wishing he was anywhere but caught between a furious homeowner and an unhinged HOA enforcer. I am giving you one last warning, Brenda, Dad's voice boomed, cutting through the morning air. Get him and his equipment off my property right now. I mean it. Brenda merely scoffed, crossing her arms. You're making a scene, David. This is an official HOA procedure. We have every right to verify property lines, especially when there's suspected encroachment. You are impeding an official investigation. Official investigation? Dad laughed, a short, humorless bark. On my land? Based on whose suspicion, Brenda? Yours? You're not the police, you're not the county, and you certainly don't have a warrant. This is trespassing, pure and simple. Just then, Grandpa Richard walked slowly towards us from the direction of his cottage. He had a different aura about him now, a quiet intensity that made everyone, even Brenda, shift uncomfortably. He didn't speak loudly, but his voice, when he finally did, was calm and firm, cutting through the shouting like a sharp blade. "Mr. Peterson," Grandpa said, addressing the surveyor directly, his eyes fixed on the man. "You understand that you are on private property, and the owner has explicitly asked you to leave. Continuing to set up your equipment here, after being told to stop, could lead to charges of trespassing and property damage." The surveyor, looking visibly relieved to have a way out, quickly began to pack up his tripod. "Ma'am," he stammered to Brenda, "he's right. I can't proceed if the property owner refuses permission and threatens legal action. It's not worth it." Brenda's smug expression crumbled. "What? You're just going to give up, Mr. Peterson? I'm paying you for this. My contract doesn't include facing arrest for trespassing, ma'am," Mr. Peterson said, stuffing the last of his gear into his truck with surprising speed. He gave Dad a quick, apologetic nod, then scrambled into his pickup. With a roar of the engine, he spun the wheels, spraying gravel, and sped away, leaving Brenda standing alone, fuming. Brenda turned on Grandpa, her face contorted with rage. You interfered. This is outrageous. You are actively obstructing the HOA's duties." Grandpa simply raised an eyebrow. "My duty, Brenda, is to protect my family and our property. Your duty apparently involves harassing your neighbors and overstepping your bounds. There's a big difference." He then turned to Dad. "David, perhaps it's time we put up a fence. A very clear, very solid fence. And maybe some cameras. Just to help Brenda remember where her duties end and our land begins." The idea of a fence, a physical barrier, suddenly felt incredibly appealing. It was a tangible way to say, "This is ours, and you cannot cross it." Brenda, her face still red, glared at them both, then spun on her heel and stomped back to her waiting SUV, muttering threats about official notices and legal action under her breath. She peeled out of our driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and an uneasy silence in her wake. The immediate crisis was over, but the feeling of violation lingered. We realized then that Brenda wasn't just an annoying busybody, she was a genuine threat to our peace and privacy. The incident galvanized us, uniting us against her relentless intrusion. This was not just a homeowner dispute, it was a fundamental clash over personal freedom and the right to feel safe in your own home. After the surveyor incident, a strange quiet settled over the neighborhood. Brenda Jenkins seemed to have temporarily retreated, perhaps to plan her next move, or perhaps to nurse her wounded pride. It felt like the calm eye of a hurricane, unsettling in its stillness. We certainly didn't trust it. Dad immediately began researching fences, looking at solid, tall options that would clearly mark our boundaries. Grandpa, meanwhile, spent hours on his computer, which was unusual for him. He was looking up property laws, HOA regulations, and even old land deeds. He had a thoughtful, almost mischievous glint in his eye, like a chess player planning several moves ahead. Mom focused on making our home feel even more like a sanctuary, baking more cookies, filling the house with comforting smells, and trying to keep Olivia distracted from the underlying tension. I found myself becoming more observant, watching the road, noticing every car that passed, every shadow that moved near our property line. We were all on high alert, waiting for Brenda's next strike. This was a period of subtle anxieties, a series of less extreme events that chipped away at our peace. We started finding flyers on our mailbox from other HOAs, faraway ones, advertising, exclusive, community living and strict enforcement of covenants. They were clearly junk mail, but their sudden appearance after Brenda's confrontations felt too coincidental to be random. It was as if someone was sending us a message, hinting at the kind of ideal community Brenda was trying to force upon us. We also noticed an increase in anonymous complaints posted on the community online forum, which we had rarely checked before. These posts detailed vague grievances about unkept properties and loud activities on the outskirts of the community, clearly aimed at us without naming names. They were irritating, but easily dismissed as the ramblings of busybodies. Then came the baffling case of the missing garden gnomes. Mom had a small collection of charming, slightly goofy garden gnomes that she loved to arrange around her flower beds. They were harmless, whimsical, and brought a smile to her face. One morning, she went out to water her plants and found 3 of her favorite gnomes gone. Just vanished. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, just empty spots where they used to stand guard. Mom was heartbroken. They weren't valuable, but they were precious to her. We searched everywhere, but they were simply gone. Dad reported it to the local sheriff, who just shrugged and said it was likely kids. But Olivia and I, after some detective work, found a small, fancy button near the empty gnome spots, a button with a distinctive pattern that looked exactly like one on Brenda Jenkins's expensive cardigan. We didn't have proof, of course, but the suspicion was like a cold, heavy stone in our stomachs. It was such a petty, vindictive act, but it stung. It showed Brenda was willing to go beyond mere complaints and actively interfere with our personal belongings. The extreme event that truly shocked us and showed the terrifying extent of Brenda's entitlement happened a few weeks later. It was a beautiful Saturday, and Dad had finally finished building a sturdy, beautiful wooden fence along the property line nearest the road. It wasn't a towering fortress, but it was solid, rustic, and clearly marked our boundary. We were all so proud of it. We decided to celebrate with a small picnic by the creek, a truly relaxing family day away from the front of the house and Brenda's prying eyes. Olivia and I were splashing in the shallow water, Dad was grilling hot dogs, and Mom was laying out a blanket. Grandpa was quietly whittling a piece of wood, enjoying the sunshine. Suddenly, we heard a distant, unfamiliar rumbling noise coming from the direction of the main road, growing louder and louder. It wasn't a car, it sounded heavier, like machinery. We looked at each other, confused. What could that be? The sound got closer, and soon we could hear the distinct crunch of heavy tires on our gravel access road. We walked towards the sound, emerging from the cover of the trees, and what we saw made our blood run cold. There, right in front of our newly built fence, was a large, professional-looking landscaping truck. And not just any truck. It was one of those massive, intimidating vehicles with a huge wood chipper attached to the back. Standing beside it, directing the grim-faced driver, was Brenda Jenkins. She was dressed in an almost military-like precision, a clipboard in her hand, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. "What in the world?" Dad whispered, his face paling. Before any of us could even react, Brenda pointed to a section of our brand-new fence. "Right there," she shouted to the driver over the roar of the idling engine. "That section of unapproved structure. Take it down. All of it." The driver, a burly man in a worn work shirt, nodded and started to dismount from his truck, heading towards our fence with a power saw in hand. "Stop!" Dad roared, sprinting forward. "What do you think you're doing?" Brenda turned, her smirk widening. "Oh, David. Just performing necessary community improvements. This fence," she declared, gesturing wildly at our beautiful, newly constructed fence, was built without proper architectural review board approval. "It's unsightly. It disrupts the visual continuity of the neighborhood. It has to go. It's on my property." Dad shouted, now standing directly in front of the bewildered landscaper. "You cannot touch it. This is private property. This is trespassing and destruction of private property. It's a nuisance." Brenda shrieked back, her face once again turning purple. "And the HOA has determined that nuisance structures must be removed. I have the authority." She waved a piece of paper, clearly a fabricated, official document, at Dad. The landscaper, now caught in the middle of another escalating argument, looked from Brenda to Dad, unsure what to do. He still held the buzzing power saw, the blade glinting menacingly in the sun. "Get that man and his machine off my land!" Dad yelled, his voice cracking with fury and disbelief. "Now, Brenda! Or I swear, you will regret it." Brenda, however, was resolute, convinced of her absolute authority. "Proceed, Mr. Jones," she commanded the landscaper, ignoring Dad's desperate plea. "I will take full responsibility. This fence is coming down." The landscaper, looking truly uncomfortable, exchanged a glance with Brenda, then slowly started to raise his power saw towards our fence. The hum of the saw was unnervingly loud, a mechanical predator poised to destroy something we had poured our time and effort into. It felt like a direct assault, not just on a wooden fence, but on our sense of security, our right to define our own space. The sight of that whirring blade, aimed at our hard work, filled me with a cold dread. This wasn't just petty anymore, this was a calculated, destructive act. We watched in horror, completely powerless, as Brenda Jenkins, with her self-appointed authority, was about to tear down our newly built boundary, mocking every sense of peace and ownership we had fought so hard to establish. The whirring hum of that power saw was a chilling sound, like a predatory insect about to tear into something precious. Brenda Jenkins stood there, a triumphant look on her face, completely unbothered by the distress she was causing. The landscaper, Mr. Jones, despite his discomfort, had the saw raised, clearly ready to obey Brenda's command. Dad was practically vibrating with fury, his voice hoarse from shouting. I could feel Olivia clutching my hand, her little knuckles white, her eyes wide with fear. This wasn't just about a fence anymore, it was about Brenda's absolute disregard for our rights, her chilling belief that she could destroy our property just because she didn't like it. "Stop right there." Grandpa Richard's voice, though calm, cut through the noise with an authority that made even the landscaper flinch. Grandpa had walked up silently, now standing right beside Dad, his gaze fixed on Brenda. His presence was like an immediate shift in the air pressure, a sudden, heavy calm before a storm. Brenda, surprised by Grandpa's sudden appearance, faltered for a second. "Mr. Richard. This is a private matter." "An HOA matter," she sputtered, trying to regain her composure. "This is not an HOA matter, Brenda," Grandpa said, his voice low and steady. "This is destruction of private property. And if that man touches one splinter of this fence, I will personally see to it that he, and you, face the full consequences of the law. And I mean prison time, Brenda. For both of you." His words hit Brenda like a physical blow. Her face, which had been a mask of triumphant malice, drained of color. She looked from Grandpa's unyielding eyes to the landscaper, who now had the saw lowered, staring at Grandpa with a mixture of fear and respect. Mr. Jones, clearly accustomed to taking orders but not breaking laws, seemed to understand the gravity in Grandpa's voice. He knew a genuine threat when he heard one. "Ma'am," Mr. Jones said to Brenda, his own voice gruff, "I'm not getting involved in a felony. My company doesn't do that. I was told this was a legal HOA directive, not an order to destroy private property." He shook his head, then turned off the power saw, the sudden silence deafening. "I'm leaving. You'll need to sort this out with the property owners yourself." He quickly scrambled back into his landscaping truck, fired up the engine, and backed out of our driveway with surprising speed, leaving Brenda standing there, utterly defeated and alone. Brenda gaped after the truck, then slowly turned her furious gaze to Grandpa. You can't just interfere like this," she shrieked, her voice high and desperate. "I have the authority. I am the head of the committee." "You have no authority here, Brenda," Grandpa said, taking a step closer, his voice still dangerously calm. "Not when you're committing a crime. Your little committee rules don't override the law. And for the last time, this is our land, our fence, and you have no right to be here, let alone try to destroy what is ours." He pointed towards the road. "Now, I suggest you leave. Before I decide to take action myself." Brenda stood frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of rage, embarrassment, and something that looked very much like fear. She knew, deep down, that she had gone too far. Without another word, she whirled around and stormed back to her white SUV, practically leaping into the driver's seat. She peeled out of our driveway, tires squealing, leaving a cloud of dust that was perhaps meant to be a final, angry gesture. Dad let out a long, shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe she actually tried to do that," he murmured, still visibly shaken. He looked at the fence, then at Grandpa. "Thank you, Dad. You saved our fence." Grandpa merely nodded, a grin set to his mouth. "She pushes too far," he said, more to himself than to us. "And some folks, they just need to learn the hard way." The incident, while terrifying in its escalation, also solidified our resolve. We were united against Brenda. And Grandpa's quiet strength had shown us that there were ways to fight back without resorting to her kind of petty nastiness. This was the most extreme confrontation yet, and it left us all shaken but also fiercely protective of our space. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of exhaust fumes and the ghost of Brenda's fury, a stark reminder that this war was far from over. In the days that followed the fence incident, the atmosphere around our property felt strangely calm, but it was a deceptive peace. Brenda's sudden absence from our immediate vicinity was noticeable. Her white SUV no longer cruised by, and we didn't find any more anonymous, self-styled HOA notices in our mailbox. It was a low point in the ongoing conflict, a lull that made us all wonder if she had finally learned her lesson, or if she was simply planning something even more elaborate and malicious. Dad worked extra hours, burying himself in his job, but his mind was clearly still on the ongoing battle for our peace. Mom tried to create a sense of normalcy, focusing on school projects with Olivia and baking all our favorite treats. Grandpa was quieter than usual, often found sitting on his porch, polishing his old fishing reel or simply staring out at the creek, a thoughtful, almost calculating look on his face. He spent more time on his computer, too, poring over legal documents he printed out. We all knew, deep down, that Brenda wasn't truly gone. She was just regrouping. This period was marked by subtle, unsettling events that hinted at Brenda's continued, if indirect, presence. We started receiving strange junk mail, not just the usual flyers, but oddly specific pamphlets for landscaping services that specialized in HOA compliance and property dispute resolution. They seemed to appear just after we'd done some work in our yard, almost as if someone was watching and then targeting us with relevant, and unwanted, advertisements. Then there was the bizarre incident of the neighborhood watch signs. Small, generic, neighborhood watch signs, the kind you buy at a hardware store, started popping up on utility poles and fence posts, not just near our property, but all over our quiet rural road. They weren't officially sanctioned by the sheriff's department, which Dad confirmed with a quick call. It felt like Brenda was trying to establish her own network of eyes and ears, creating a pervasive sense of being watched, even when she wasn't directly present. It was a chilling reminder that her influence, or at least her desire to control, extended far beyond her own property. The most unnerving of these subtle acts occurred one sunny afternoon when Mom found a small, fancy camera strategically hidden in the bushes at the very edge of our property, pointing directly at our front door and driveway. It was a motion-activated camera, disguised as a rock. It looked expensive. Mom was horrified. It was a clear invasion of our privacy, a brazen attempt to spy on our daily lives. She carefully unplugged it, brought it inside, and placed it on the kitchen counter, looking utterly disgusted. Dad immediately called the sheriff, but without concrete proof of who placed it there, and given its location on the edge of our property, the deputies said there wasn't much they could do. They advised us to just keep it as evidence and to put up our own cameras. "She's crossing a line now," Dad said, his voice tight with anger, staring at the small, intrusive device. "This is harassment. This is surveillance." Grandpa, who had walked in just as they were discussing it, picked up the camera, turning it over in his large, calloused hands. He examined it closely, a peculiar expression on his face. "Interesting," he murmured. "High-quality lens. Good battery life, I'll bet." He then looked at us, a glint in his eye. "Don't worry about this. Some things, they just have a way of finding their way home." His words were cryptic, but there was a quiet confidence in his tone that was almost comforting. Then came the new extreme event, a direct and devastating blow that pushed us to the very brink. It happened on a Thursday morning, a day that started like any other. Mom and Dad were at work, Olivia was at school, and I was home, doing some online classes. Grandpa was out in his garden, enjoying the peace. Suddenly, our internet connection died. No Wi-Fi, no signal, nothing. I called the internet provider, and they said there was an outage in our area, but it would be fixed soon. Annoying, but not unusual. What happened next was. A few hours later, the power went out too. The house went silent, the hum of the refrigerator ceasing, the lights going dark. This was unusual. We rarely lost power, and when we did, it was usually for a few minutes. I went outside to check the power box, then walked around the house, looking for any obvious issues. That's when I saw it. Standing near the main utility pole at the edge of our property, the pole that fed electricity and internet directly to our house, were two men in utility uniforms. They weren't from our local power company, their logo was unfamiliar. And talking to them, gesturing wildly towards our house, was Brenda Jenkins. She was dressed in her usual pristine clothes, looking absolutely delighted, a smug smile plastered on her face. I walked towards them, a cold dread washing over me. "Excuse me," I called out, "what are you doing? Our power just went out." One of the men, a burly guy with a greasy cap, turned to me, a shrug on his face. "Just following orders, kid. Got a work order here to disconnect service to this address. Apparently, there's been some unsafe power consumption and unauthorized network interference from this property." He held up a clipboard, but I couldn't read what was on it from a distance. "What?" I exclaimed, utterly stunned. "That's impossible. We haven't done anything unsafe. And our internet just died, too." Brenda stepped forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Oh, Kevin. Such a shame, isn't it? But you see, the HOA has grave concerns about the drain your property is putting on the community's shared resources. The excessive power usage, the strain on the internet infrastructure. It's all very problematic for everyone else. We simply had to take action for the good of the whole community." "You did this?" I stared at her in disbelief. "You actually cut off our electricity and internet?" "I simply facilitated the necessary steps," Brenda said, her smile widening. "The HOA has a responsibility to ensure fair resource allocation. Think of it as a temporary measure until your family learns to be more considerate." My mind reeled. She had managed to get our utilities shut off. This wasn't just petty vandalism or intrusive spying, this was a direct assault on our ability to live in our own home, to communicate, to even have basic necessities. This was a direct, horrifying act of power abuse. The two utility workers looked uncomfortable, clearly just doing a job they were told to do, but Brenda just stood there, radiating smug satisfaction. My blood ran cold, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. She wasn't just a nuisance, she was dangerous. We were completely vulnerable, stripped of basic services, all because of her twisted sense of control. This wasn't a game anymore. The sight of Brenda Jenkins, standing triumphantly beside the utility workers who had just cut off our electricity and internet, filled me with a cold, hollow dread unlike anything I'd felt before. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a brazen, calculated attack on our ability to live comfortably, a chilling display of her unchecked power. The two utility men, looking increasingly uneasy, finished their work, their faces betraying a clear reluctance to be involved in Brenda's twisted scheme. They quickly gathered their tools, mumbled something about a valid work order, and sped off, leaving Brenda standing alone, basking in her malicious victory. She cast a final, smug look at our now silent house, then sauntered back to her SUV and drove away, leaving us in a stunned, powerless silence. I rushed inside, the sudden quiet of the house deafening. No refrigerator hum, no lights, no Wi-Fi indicator blinking on the router. It was a stark reminder of our vulnerability. I tried my phone, but without Wi-Fi, my internet was spotty, and I couldn't reach Mom or Dad at work easily. This wasn't just petty, it was an act of genuine cruelty, designed to exert maximum control and discomfort. It felt like Brenda was trying to drive us out, to make our dream home unlivable. I stared out the window, a mix of anger and helplessness swirling inside me. The feeling of being targeted, of having our basic needs deliberately cut off, was terrifying. I knew then that Brenda Jenkins was more than just an annoying neighbor, she was a clear and present danger to our peace and well-being. In the immediate aftermath of the utility cut off, our lives felt strangely altered. This was a deep low point, a true test of our resilience. Without electricity, the refrigerator slowly warmed, food began to spoil, and the nights became long and dark, lit only by flashlights and candles. Without internet, the outside world felt distant and unreachable. Dad had to take time off work, as his job relied heavily on a stable internet connection. Mom struggled to manage without the usual conveniences, her patience wearing thin. Olivia, confused and scared by the sudden changes, clung to Mom more often. We felt isolated, cut off, and utterly at the mercy of Brenda's relentless malice. This period was filled with a series of subtle yet deeply unsettling events that amplified our sense of vulnerability. Our landline phone, which we rarely used, started ringing constantly, but whenever we answered, there was only silence on the other end, or sometimes a distorted whisper that sounded suspiciously like Brenda's voice, barely audible, saying something about order and consequences. It was a psychological game, designed to keep us on edge, to remind us that we were being watched and tormented. Then, one evening, as we sat on the porch trying to enjoy the twilight, a drone, small and barely visible, buzzed ominously overhead. It circled our property slowly, its camera eye clearly aimed at our house, before disappearing into the deepening gloom. We had no doubt it was Brenda, continuing her surveillance, rubbing her power over us in our faces. It was incredibly creepy, making us feel like prisoners in our own home. The local sheriff's department, when Dad called them again, seemed increasingly exasperated. They said they couldn't prove Brenda was behind the drone, and as for the power and internet, they claimed it was a civil matter between us and the HOA, not a criminal one, unless we could prove malicious intent and damage. They advised us to get a lawyer, which Dad was already looking into, but lawyers cost money and time, and we were running out of both. We felt abandoned by the authorities, left to fend for ourselves against Brenda's escalating campaign. The silence of the house, the constant unease, and the feeling of being watched weighed heavily on all of us. Grandpa, though, seemed to move through this crisis with a strange sort of calm. He didn't complain about the lack of electricity or internet. Instead, he spent his days tinkering in his shed, his old radio playing softly. He'd occasionally come over to our house with a newly sharpened tool, or a strange, intricate-looking device he'd cobbled together from spare parts. He offered small, quiet words of encouragement, but mostly, he just watched. He watched the road, he watched the sky, and he watched us, his eyes holding a depth of wisdom and patience that we couldn't quite grasp. He was preparing, we sensed, for something. The new extreme event, the one that finally pushed Grandpa past his quiet contemplation and into decisive action, happened just as we thought things couldn't get any worse. It was a stifling hot afternoon, the kind where the air felt thick and heavy, and even the slightest movement caused sweat to bead on your skin. Without air conditioning, our house was an oven. Mom had decided to take Olivia to the local library for some relief and to use their Wi-Fi to catch up on emails. Dad was still trying to figure out how to get our power back on, making endless calls to the utility company, who kept repeating that Brenda's work order was valid and active. I was outside, trying to find a cool spot under the shade of a large oak tree, when I heard it. A loud, rumbling noise approaching our property. It was the distinct sound of a large truck, but not the landscaping truck from before. This sounded heavier, more industrial. I squinted down the dusty road, and what I saw made my stomach clench with cold dread. It was a tow truck. Not a small one, but a massive, heavy-duty tow truck, the kind used for hauling big rigs. And driving it, with a sneer on his face, was a burly man with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Sitting proudly in the passenger seat, pointing directly at our property, was Brenda Jenkins. Her face was alight with a maniacal glee, a truly terrifying expression that showed she had reached the pinnacle of her malicious plan. The tow truck rumbled directly into our driveway, churning up dust and gravel. Brenda leaped out, radiating triumph. "David! Kevin! Where are you?" she shrieked, clearly expecting us to be huddled inside, defeated. When she saw me, her smile grew even wider. "Ah, Kevin. Perfect. You can witness this." Dad, drawn by the noise, emerged from the house, his face grim. "Brenda. What in God's name are you doing now?" he demanded, his voice thick with exhaustion and disbelief. "Simply enforcing community standards," Brenda declared, spreading her arms wide, as if addressing a grand audience. "The HOA has determined that your vehicle, parked on the street for extended periods." She pointed at Dad's pickup truck, which was currently parked in front of our house, on our private property, well off the main road, but still visible. It had been parked there for a few days because Dad hadn't been able to drive it much since the power went out and he couldn't fill up the gas with the electric pump. "Is a hazard. It's unsightly. It's a violation of parking ordinances, Article 14, subsection A." And, she added, her voice rising to a triumphant crescendo, "since you refuse to comply, we are having it removed." The tow truck driver, without a word, began to maneuver his massive vehicle towards Dad's pickup. The huge metal arms of the tow truck extended, ready to grab the front wheels of Dad's truck. "No. You can't," Dad roared, scrambling forward. "That's my truck. It's on my property. You have no right to touch it." He tried to stand in front of the truck, to physically block the tow truck driver. Brenda laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, but we do. The HOA has full authority over community aesthetics and safety. And your truck, David, is a blight. Remove it, Mr. Harris," she commanded the tow truck driver. Mr. Harris, the driver, seemed entirely unmoved by Dad's desperate pleas. He simply grunted, his face blank, and continued to position his tow truck. The metal hooks began to swing down towards Dad's truck. This was it. She wasn't just disrupting our lives, she was now actively attempting to steal our property, our mode of transportation, right from our own driveway. It was an act of pure, unadulterated aggression, pushing us to a point where retaliation felt not just justified, but necessary for our very survival in this community. The clanking of the tow truck's machinery felt like the final, unbearable straw. The metallic groan of the tow truck's arms, extending like monstrous claws towards Dad's pickup, was a sound that pierced the hot afternoon air. Brenda Jenkins stood a few feet away, her face alight with a horrifying blend of glee and malice, her gaze fixed on the scene as if it were a thrilling spectacle. Dad was shouting, desperately trying to block the tow truck driver, Mr. Harris, but the man was a hulking figure, seemingly immune to pleas or threats. This wasn't just about a truck. It was about Brenda proving she could take anything from us, anytime, anywhere. It was the ultimate power play, designed to break our spirit. I said, "Get away from my truck." Dad roared, shoving the tow truck driver, who just grunted and continued to back up his massive vehicle. The situation felt utterly out of control, spiraling into something violent and desperate. I could feel the heat radiating off Dad's body, his fury a palpable thing in the air. Just as the tow truck's hooks were about to latch onto Dad's front bumper, a calm, steady voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Harris. I suggest you reconsider your actions." Everyone turned. Grandpa Richard stood there, not rushing, not shouting, but with an unwavering stillness that commanded attention. He held a familiar, worn leather-bound book in one hand, and in the other, a folded piece of paper. His eyes, usually gentle, held a piercing intensity that made even the burly tow truck driver pause. Brenda, ever confident in her perceived authority, scoffed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mr. Richard. Not you again. This is an official HOA matter. Your family is in violation." "No, Brenda," Grandpa said, his voice quiet but firm, "this is a violation of state law. And federal law. And perhaps, even a deeper kind of law. Mr. Harris," he continued, addressing the tow truck driver directly, "are you aware of what constitutes unlawful towing? Specifically, towing a vehicle from private property without express permission from the owner, or a court order?" Mr. Harris, already looking uncomfortable, hesitated. "Look, mister, I just got a work order from the HOA. She said it was legit." He gestured vaguely at Brenda. "A work order from Brenda Jenkins," Grandpa stated, his gaze unblinking. "Not from the county. Not from a court. And certainly not from David, the owner of this vehicle and this property." He unfolded the piece of paper in his hand. "This is a copy of a temporary restraining order. Just issued by the county judge this morning, based on a motion filed by my son. It explicitly prohibits Brenda Jenkins, and any parties acting on her behalf, from entering our property or interfering with our possessions without a direct court order. And it specifically mentions vehicles." Brenda's jaw dropped. Her triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock. She sputtered, A restraining order? That's impossible. I didn't get any notice." "You will," Grandpa assured her, a hint of something cold in his tone. "The sheriff is delivering it to your house as we speak. And if this tow truck moves 1 inch further, Mr. Harris, you will be in direct violation of a court order. That's a serious offense. And Brenda," he added, turning his piercing gaze to her, "that's contempt of court. You could be looking at a significant fine, or worse, jail time." Mr. Harris, seeing the genuine court document in Grandpa's hand and hearing the words, "jail time," immediately dropped the tow truck's arms to the ground with a loud clang. He looked absolutely terrified. "Lady," he snapped at Brenda, his voice now furious, "you told me this was all legal. I'm out of here. I don't mess with restraining orders." He quickly pulled his truck away from Dad's pickup, reversed, and sped out of our driveway, leaving Brenda standing alone, exposed and humiliated. Brenda was speechless, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. She lunged forward, her finger pointing at Grandpa, her voice a desperate shriek. "You did this. You planned this. You interfering old man. I will sue you. I will sue all of you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, I think we have a pretty good idea, Brenda," Grandpa said, his voice still calm, but now with a sharp edge of finality. He glanced at Dad, a silent communication passing between them. Then, he looked at Brenda, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his lips. "And I think it's time you learned what happens when you push good people too far. Especially when you decide to play cop on our land." Brenda, completely unhinged, started to rant, her words a jumble of threats and accusations. She was so focused on her own outrage that she didn't even notice Grandpa had subtly moved, picked up a heavy chain from the side of the garage, and walked over to her gleaming white SUV, which she had carelessly left idling in our driveway. With swift, practiced movements that only a retired mechanic could manage, Grandpa expertly looped the chain around the front axle of Brenda's vehicle. He then hooked the other end to the tow hitch of his old, rusty Ford F-250, which had been parked strategically out of sight, just around the corner of the house. He didn't even look at Brenda as he climbed into his truck. "What are you doing?" Brenda shrieked, finally noticing the clanking of chains. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw her SUV connected to Grandpa's truck. Grandpa just put his truck into gear. The old Ford rumbled to life, a low, powerful growl. With a mighty lurch, it began to pull. Brenda's SUV, still in park, groaned and protested, its tires locked. But Grandpa's truck was built for heavy loads. It dragged Brenda's pristine vehicle across our gravel driveway, leaving deep gouges in the stones. "My car! What are you doing to my car?" Brenda screamed, running after it, her carefully styled hair flying wildly. "Stop! You lunatic! Stop!" Grandpa, his face a mask of determined calm, continued to drive, slowly but steadily, pulling Brenda's expensive SUV down the long, dusty access road that led directly to the creek at the far edge of our property. The screams of Brenda Jenkins faded into the distance, growing fainter as the tow truck, and her vehicle, disappeared behind a thick line of trees. Dad, Mom, Olivia, and I stood on the porch, watching in stunned silence. We could hear the faint sounds of Brenda's increasingly desperate wails, and then, a loud, undeniable splash. A splash that echoed through the otherwise quiet afternoon, a sound of finality. A few minutes later, Grandpa's old Ford rumbled back into view, alone. He parked it precisely, then got out, wiping his hands on a rag. He walked over to us, his eyes twinkling with a satisfaction that was hard to miss. "Well," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, "it seems Brenda Jenkins's vehicle needed a little, recreational dip. For aesthetic consistency with the natural landscape, you understand." He winked. "And to help her remember where our property line ends. And where the creek begins." The sound of distant sirens began to grow louder. Brenda would undoubtedly be calling the police, hysterical about her submerged vehicle. But as we stood there, watching Grandpa, a profound sense of peace settled over us. We knew this wasn't the end of all the trouble, but it was certainly the beginning of the end for Brenda's tyranny. She had played cop on our land, pushing and pushing, until Grandpa, with his quiet wisdom and surprising resolve, had given her a one-way tow to the creek. The peace we had sought when we moved here, the freedom to simply be in our own home, felt closer than ever before, won not by shouting or petty complaints, but by firm boundaries and a surprising act of poetic justice.